Hello everybody, Thy Lord Root here, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Play Kerbal Space Program. So this is episode 13, and I suppose for the 13th episode we should do something that I wouldn't have much luck with, so I've decided to do something quite difficult to pull off. Y'all will probably recall, those of you who have watched my channel so far, you'll probably recall I was talking about doing a space plane, and here I've just constructed that. You'll see it has a bunch of air intakes on it. More about that in a bit, but it's a very small plane, and there's a reason really for this, because we have to be able to get this thing up pretty high up into the atmosphere. And then we've also got to have enough fuel to trigger our rockets. So it's called STU. To tell you the truth, I'm not entirely sure why I named it that. I guess I was thinking of like Disco Stew from The Simpsons, right? But and see, we have even though there's a docking port that you can get that integrates into the body of the plane here, I went with the forward docking port because I figured, the intakes would get in the way and everything, and that inline docking port is alright for some things, I'm sure, but in this case, I like the forward docking port better. And then we also have several thrusters. Note that we have 8 in total because I was actually wanting to do, it's really the only places I could fit them, and we have canards as well for stability, although stability is not going to be the easiest thing to achieve with this. I would say probably, on the order of difficulty, this is maybe slightly less difficult than my IVA moonshot video. In some ways, the moonshot is a bit easier because the most difficult thing to do here, at least in my opinion, is to get yourself up into the atmosphere. And this thing is notoriously, well, I should say space planes in general are notoriously difficult to control. So I'm just going to turn on my jet engines with an action group. You don't want to trigger all the engines at once. That usually leads to much wailing and gnashing of the teeth. And I'm going to pull up probably about the time I get to 90. I have to be real careful here because I might end up crashing into the runway if I pull up a little bit too much. But, yeah, we're gonna go ahead, we'll pull up real quick, and I'll bring in my landing gear before I forget to do that. And I'm just going to go ahead and get as close to 45 degrees as I can. I'll also bring up my resources, and explain the intakes a little bit as well, because the deal is right now we have like 80, or 0.8, air, right? That's not too bad. I mean, it's plenty for a terrestrial aircraft, but we're trying to get up into space. And the deal is that our jet engines are very efficient, but we have the problem that they need air. So I have 4 of these intakes just to provide a little bit of a comfort zone, because I tried it with 2. It's possible with 2, but it's difficult nonetheless. And in general, like, these things are they're very finicky. One wrong move and you could, in this case, you'll pitch up and completely undo all of your hard work. And the flight profile for this has to be practiced pretty well. And of course, on my skunkworks file that I use to develop these things, because I prefer not to I largely prefer not to do testing on the main game, just because it breaks continuity a little bit. And you can see that already, like my spacecraft here has issues with if you look up in the corner, it's lagging, and it probably is because I only have 2 gigs of RAM in this machine. I've been meaning to order a new one, I just haven't really gotten around to it. But yeah, I mean the deal with this is that it's stable until you fly it up real high, and then it starts wigging out, and so we definitely want as much air as we can get so that we can make good use of our intakes. You'll notice I'm using the 2 Poodle engines, and together that gives me, I think, a thrust to weight ratio of about 1.5 or 2, according to Mech Job. And that's pretty nice. I mean, it's a lot of our fuel here we're investing into our rocket just because our rocket doesn't get nearly as much ISP here. Now, of course, it's worth pointing out that you know the plane more or less can fly in whatever direction it wants to. These control surfaces help with that, and one thing you'll probably notice in this video whenever I get up to space is that my control surfaces are going to go crazy. That's It's kind of weird because, like, I think a lot of the lag comes from the fact that the control surfaces are so detailed, and they have, complex hit regions and everything, but um with that having been said, um, the idea here is to basically get up to 20,000, which is way above what most aircraft can fly at. I mean, I could actually make this a really small plane if I didn't have to attach rockets to it and everything. And these 4 intakes powering this one jet engine helps. I mean, it's you can do it with 2, I believe, but I mean, part of the issue is that there are radial intakes that make this a little bit more difficult to use. We're gonna have to be watching our I guess our apoapsis constantly, as well as our air. Well, these are actually the radial intakes, I guess. But they're little intakes that look a little bit like, I guess, like a horn tweeter or something, even though they serve 2 completely different purposes. And those I found don't work that well. They tend to lose intake air fairly quickly, and they add the possibility that you could store a lot of intake air, but on the flip side, the trouble is that they really don't perform all that well at higher altitudes, at least in my experience. So it looks like I'm already a bit above 90. I'm gonna start, you know, getting this thing a little bit under 90 so that we don't waste our intake as much. Because you'll find whenever you build these things, this is a big limiting factor, is how much intake air you can take in. We're going to get up to about 20,000 or so, and the idea is to get our velocity up to at least 800. We could do more. But we want to be very careful with this because You'll notice this thing has a tendency to pitch up as it is. Now, if you don't have those canards on that on there, it probably won't do that. But then the issue seems to be that you can't get a good angle out of this. So there are many trade-offs to be made here. And so the idea is basically, we're going to get up as fast as we can. Try not to overdo our our ascent here. And you'll see this thing, it doesn't really want to stay in place. And we'll flame out a bit. That's actually one of the reasons why I put only one engine on this thing, is because if we flame out with one engine, one jet engine that is, we lose control. And I happen to have the rockets bound to an action group, so see, we're already beginning to pitch up here. I'm just gonna throttle down a bit, and hopefully that'll help. Yeah, there's various control issues here, and we've got to deal with them all. So I'm just going to I'm gonna try get up to a pretty high speed here. If I were smart about this, I probably would have waited for the space station to be above us. But such as it is, I did not. So it looks like it's about time to fire our engines. And we just want to very steadily climb. One thing definitely we want to make sure of is that we don't lose height here, as we're doing now. Because it's going to be very difficult to regain that. And I think maybe we'll do better with this when we're going closer to the orbital velocity. This thing has a fair amount of delta V in it, so, I mean, that'll help tie it, I think. We gotta pull this thing up. And be careful not to stall this thing, because if we do stall it, we're in trouble. We're in pretty big trouble, in fact, if we stall it. We have some intake air. Avail myself to that, bring up our apsis just a little bit. And we'll run out pretty soon, I'm sure. So I think we're doing okay here. We're not gonna have nearly as much in the way of delta V as I'd hoped. If we can get out of this stratosphere, I think we'll do pretty well. And we'll see when we when we do this, we'll see if we in fact have enough Delta V to use MacJub to dock, because y'all have seen plenty of dockings by now. We're not going to use it to dock, but we might use it to intercept. But I don't want to do that unless we have a fair amount of Delta V left, which it doesn't look like will be the case. I mean, we have, we're already pretty well inclined here, which is, bad enough, because we're going to have to make an inclination change, so we're going to need to save some Delta V for that. I'm going to try and at least fix that a little bit. And you'll see here my plane wants to pitch up constantly. So let's see, where are we at? It looks like we'll want to, but you know what, let's see what MechJub says about, my Delta V info. We have 551. I think that is more than good enough for us, although we haven't really done much, but we'll use this rendezvous autopilot and we'll set the difference here at 25. So, oh shit. I probably should have waited to get into orbit. Let me get into orbit real quick. Because that will probably screw up our rendezvous. Oh, just a little bit. I'll just do the bare minimum to get into orbit. So periapsis at 76. That looks good to me. And of course, we're spinning out of control now. And really, I don't even care if we go a little bit beyond that, to tell you the truth. Yeah, I'm thinking at this point, we should do the rendezvous manually. Just because I don't think MechJub is going to be able to do it without wasting a ton of fuel. And so I'm going to start this at maybe 11 seconds or so. Make sure we're in position, at least with this, the torque is... torque is reasonable with this. Now there's another issue with this too, which is that even in space, and I don't know if it has to do with maybe like the center of gravity. I mean, that would make sense to me that this is a center of gravity issue. We'll just go a little bit beyond here. Trapezoapsis. Oh yeah, we need to bring our periapsis up a lot. At least out of the, out of our, no man's land or whatever. Let's see. We got a lot of catching up to do. I'm not entirely... It's probably better for us to speed up in this case. At least I would think. I'm just going to kill that maneuver node. Another thing we probably want to do here is we want to get our inclination correct. So what is that? That's the descending node. Why is it that I cannot... I was hitting the wrong key. This is bound to screw us up a little bit on our fuel budget, but there's really not much that we can do about that. And when we get to our ascending node, we will, when we get to our ascending node, we will go the opposite direction. See, what does delta V look like? 77 meters per second. Well, this was not good at all. I was going to attempt to dock, but I don't know if I can reasonably do so at this point. I mean, I guess at least the proof of concept is there that we can, you know, we can get this thing into space. And under ideal circumstances, we would be able to get this thing to dock too. I did it during the test run, but, you know, I don't really think we'll attempt to dock today, just because y'all have seen docking a million times. So instead, we're just going to try a land. And I was going to mention, you know, mech job isn't that good for landing either. Because it tends to ignore the engine, so we're going to fly this thing by ourselves. And because we're right above KSC, we won't be able to land there either. So I'm just going to, instead, I have over half a tank of fuel left. Maybe with some better piloting, I'd actually get this thing to dock. It's probably Murphy's Law in full effect here. You know, with that having been said, let me just bring down mech job, because, you know, with that having been said, we did get a plane into orbit, and that's a good start. Part of the reason, incidentally, why I'm not really into the whole spaceplane thing. Planes they're a good challenge, but they're very difficult to fly, and there are some weird issues with them, like, for instance, of course, mine may be purely a center of mass issue. But, let's see, are we... Oh, we're draining fuel. Well, that is not good. I guess I was throttled up when I did that. But, you know, I was gonna say at any rate, like, that's part of the deal with space planes, is that, they're difficult to get up into space. At least from the KSC. And if you watch any video on space planes, I mean, I did a ton of research into this just because of the fact that these things are so hard to design. I mean, pretty much everybody will tell you the same thing, you know, that it's very difficult to get a plane up into orbit, let alone, you know, to dock. Now, as an emergency, what I probably should have done is I should have attached a couple of separatrons, so that what would happen is, well, basically the idea would be if I was stuck up here in space, I would have, some form of emergency, a deorbit available. Incidentally, while we're on that subject, I was reading a little bit about the Russian space program the other day, and there's of course the what are called the lost cosmonauts. This is kind of like the, I guess, space conspiracy theory, um, for Russia. Like, the United States has their moon hoaxers, and the I guess Russia has the lost cosmonauts. But early in the Russian space program, back before Vashkod was launched, Vashkod 1, that is, there was a prototype for it, and um, it just happened to be. I don't know if it was boilerplate. I highly doubt it because they were testing the hardware. And the idea, is that, well, this thing remained in orbit. They couldn't figure out how to bring it down, or they had an idea of how to bring it down, but they just couldn't make it happen. So, there was some speculation about the fact that, maybe this had been a failed Vashkod attempt, and that maybe the first person in space wasn't Yuri Gagarin. But the United States actually tracked this thing. It's kind of like the same argument that, you would make for, um, for the moon landings, right? That, well, aside from the fact that we have evidence that the moon landings actually happened, including, recently, actual, satellite photography of the landing sites where you can see the descent stage of the Apollo landers. Um, there's this other argument, well, if we tried to bullshit Russia, then they would certainly call us out on it. I mean, it was in the middle of the Cold War. And space was a big deal during that time because it was it was an issue of national pride or whatever. So Russia would have said something, and we would have said something too if they had, I guess if they had, sent one of their own cosmonauts to die, that would be a very damning event for the Russian space program. Now, incidentally, there were a few cosmonauts that were supposed to fly, that people consider lost cosmonauts. I can't remember the dude's name off the top of my head, but there was one that, I guess he was in the Russian Navy. It might have been in the Air Force at that time. I'm not exactly sure when the Russians started their own Air Force, but the idea is, or basically what happened is that he ended up getting into a brawl with one of, I don't think it was one of his superiors, but it was bad enough that, um, had he stood down, he would have been able to fly. But because he didn't stand down, he got booted out of the space program. And, I guess for him, this was enough to dash his dreams of being an astronaut. So, unfortunately, he ended up, getting really drunk one night and walking in front of a train. And I don't think I have to tell you what happened next, but, it was very disappointing for him. I mean, he could have been the next job. I guess speaking of which, maybe that's why we didn't get up into space with, or we got up into space, but we didn't have enough fuel left for docking because we don't have Jeb. We have Donhat. Um, I guess his hat is made from a person formerly named Don. You know, I'm actually kind of curious, like, how they come to naming, how Squad comes to naming I guess the Kerbals that aren't the main ones. I mean, there are, I think it's kind of like with Prison Architect, you know, like, there are Kerbals that are named after, important people, which I guess important people is kind of a relative term, right? Like, they're people, I guess, in the KSP community that do much evangelism with it. And I mean, it's actually kind of hard not to once you start playing it. I mean, I've actually, I just, one of the students that I work with just started playing this, and, he didn't quite know where to start at first, and I'm like, trust me, man, like you'll pick this up in no time, and then you'll start jabbering on about like astronomy and whatnot. So I mean, the cool thing about this game, I think, is that it does teach you a lot, and I mean, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not entirely accurate with physics. I think if it were, then it would either be way too difficult or way too taxing on the CPU. Probably both. So this is a um game where you get to learn basic rocketry. I mean, that's really cool. I mean, it's maybe not so much for the generation after me. I'm so-called Generation Y, or I guess they call us the millennials now. I don't really keep up with all that because it's changing constantly, and it doesn't really interest me as much. But I mean, even people in like my nephew's generation, I mean, he's about like 9 or 10 now. I mean, they're like, wow, this is cool. They get really into the games like, of course, Minecraft has always been on the top of the list, I think, for that age group because it's so much like playing with Lego. But also games like this, games like StarMade, which is really fun. I should do a few videos on it. And oddly enough, StarMade is a little bit less taxing on this machine, even though it's you would think the opposite would be true. But yeah, I mean, I figure, you know, it's games like this that I think not only shows us that you can be a successful indie developer by by taking science and, oh look, I got reentry heating. You can be a successful developer in in terms of like financial success by taking something that is more or less really nerdy, and let's see if I can't. or bring this up some. Um, you can take something that's really nerdy and you can turn it into a game, and you know, if you pick the right subject, you can make a lot of money off of it. Let's see. I'm gonna crash into a mountain, I think, if I don't pull up real soon. I'm gonna go ahead and start my engines just a little bit. I guess, although I could save that for when I'm in the atmosphere and have lost most of my Delta V. So really right now there's nothing for my control surfaces to use. And the bad thing, I should have burned, I guess, when I was on the dark side. It's a little bit too late for that now. Because I can't really see where I'm going. And I'm afraid that if I reorient my camera, then I will introduce a ton of lag. Because this thing, I don't know again if it's the complexity of the model or if it's the aerodynamics that are coming into play here. Maybe it'll, maybe it'll get a little bit better. I think if I come up like this, maybe. Well, I guess not. But yeah, I mean, I was gonna say for whatever reason it's really laggy, and I keep on telling myself I'm gonna get myself a new machine really soon now, but I just haven't really gotten around to it. Though I don't think I'm gonna be able to land at KSC at this rate. But what I will be able to do is travel around for just a little bit. Maintain a a fairly steady altitude here. Maybe I'm gonna set my altitude at like 4K or so. And I'll turn on my engines a little bit and slowly bring up my prograde. And I'm thinking with this maybe, maybe I'll find a good landing spot. Preferably on the day side. Which I believe is shortly coming up. I hope so anyway, because if I don't have a good landing spot, then I'm in trouble for sure. So yeah, my descent is sufficiently slow, I think. And, maybe I can just go ahead and land here. Which I may just go ahead and try. One of the nice things about space planes, is that, you do have more leeway in picking where you land. I mean, if it didn't have much in the way of leeway. Like, with planes, and they would be almost too difficult to fly. And I mean, in truth, planes are, at least in terms of physics, a little bit easier to fly than most vehicles, most air vehicles. I mean, I guess unless you're talking about like something like a blimp or something, but helicopters, for instance, like require a ton of concentration to to fly, and I have a friend that he served in the military on the demilitarized zone in Korea, and because of that, there was a lot of you know traffic from the Air Force and everything. Um, and so he was in a helicopter squadron, but he was more like an engineer than, I guess, like a pilot. But he said that he had flown with his pilot for maybe like 2 years, and until like maybe the last flight or so, he didn't realize that the pilot had been like getting drunk before he got behind the joystick in the helicopter, and that's not a good sign. It's Helicopters are generally like insanely difficult to fly, and I guess like maybe something like Flight Simulator will give you an inkling of that, but um like for instance with planes, like planes have lift, in one particular direction, and they can glide and stuff like that. You can't really make a helicopter glide as such. And not only that, but with planes you don't have the torque that comes with the rotor on a helicopter, or not the rotor, but the propeller. In fact, that's why they put the rotor on there, is because without it, the if you remember Newton's third, um, which says that um, um, a force on a body is met with an equal and opposite reaction. That's kind of what's going on with the helicopter. So the rotor keeps the fuselage of the helicopter from essentially from spinning out of control, because what it wants to do is it wants to spin in the opposite direction of the rotor. And that was actually, as far as VTOLs go, like um helicopter development was something that took years to do, and like 20 or 30 years after the airplane came. VTOLs in general have that problem. I mean, if you look at like something like a Harrier jet, then you require really good concentration for that, and probably computer assistance, because the center of mass, like you have to account for it perfectly. Like you have to gimbal your engines as well as you can, or else you will end up, tipping over the fuselage of the plane, either directly pitching up, in which case you'll stall out, or um, pitching down, in which case you'll fly into the runway. Neither one of those things are really a good thing, so VTOLs are difficult for that reason. And you can make VTOLs in KSP, by the way, but they're difficult to They're difficult to do just because of that. They're probably more difficult than the Spaceplane was, and the Spaceplane is, in terms of like design and everything, is a veritable nightmare. I mean, we at least showed that we could get up into orbit though with our space plane, and I'm happy with that. I mean, I've also gotten it to dock, which is good enough for me personally. I don't have video of it, and I'm probably not going to bother making video of it. Just because when it comes down to it, we could be flying the same space plane over and over again, or um, we could be, um, I guess, working to get, you know, this. Let's bring down my gear real quick and hope that the drag helps us some. We could be doing other things. Like, for instance, I was thinking maybe we could start on a lunar base with Kethane and maybe set up a transit, um, a transportation network. We could go to Minmus, which I think would be a cool idea. We haven't really done anything with Minmus, and Minmus is supposed to be harder to get to but easier to land on. Another nice thing about Minmus is that it's really close to, I guess, it's very easy to get into an escape trajectory with Minmus, which makes it the perfect place for us to start, building a base because we can use it as a fueling depot. Now, granted, the moon is easier to get to, by far, but Minmus wouldn't be a bad idea for a fueling depot because, you know, with Minmus, we can very easily like take a mission to Duna or something. And of course, maybe I should at some point relieve the crew in the space station because they've been up there for about a month now. In game time, of course. It's but while we're waiting to make contact with the surface, we could. We'll check in on I guess on Explorer One a little bit later. It probably hasn't gone too terribly far, and then we'll just I'm gonna slow down a bit. Hopefully, I won't be going so fast that my wheels will break off. But it looks like this is a good place to land. It looks like we're barely moving, but we are making pretty good progress. The trouble is, of course, that we want to, maybe I can get us down to that point. Maybe down to 1,000 feet. Although there's no telling where there's no telling where um, I guess where the surface is. I'm gaining altitude now. If this thing had a cockpit, which that's one of the things about this capsule is that it doesn't. That we could just, look at the altimeter to be able to tell. We'll slow down eventually, and hopefully nothing will break off in the process. I think, this thing. I don't know if it's SAS that's causing this or not. I think it must be. Um, this thing is very difficult to keep oriented in one direction. It has its preferred trajectories, and I hope we are not. It looks like we may land on this mountain, which would be unfortunate, but I can't. I don't really see my shadow. It's hard to judge distance in a plane. And I guess the only thing I really could do is maybe count on the shadow showing up soon, and hope that by then um, that my velocity is dropped to the point to where the wheels won't come off. I mean, then again, our vertical velocity is not all that bad. I mean, maybe I'm looking at the wrong velocity here. But yeah, I guess while we're waiting for Christmas to come, let's see. Let's think about what else we could do. I could start sending out probes to other planets. That'd be cool. We already know that we have enough delta V in one of our oh, I need to start pulling up, I think. We have enough delta V in one of our probes to get us to I guess to maybe Duna might be a cool one to go to. Yeah, we were getting a little bit too close. We landed? Hey, I think we've landed. Um, and somehow we've managed to survive. I probably should not have hit the brakes then. And the game, I guess, magically runs a little bit faster. But anyway, this has been Thy Lord Root, and I hope that y'all all enjoyed this. I will see y'all next time.